September 11, 2001 was a date that marked an unprecedented event in American history, a date where 3 coordinated attacks against the United States resulted in the deaths of 2,996 people, including the 19 Al-Qaeda terrorist hijackers who had seized and crashed 4 commercial planes into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the Pennsylvanian countryside. It had been revealed later that the group were intending to hijack planes that were all scheduled to depart at the same time, so that the attacks would occur simultaneously. Until that point, the hijacking of multiple planes at once had not happened anywhere in the world since the 1970s. In 2001, airport security was far more lax than it is today, and it was on the morning of September 11 that all 19 hijackers passed through security carrying chemical sprays, box cutters, and utility knives. At the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, New York, 2,763 people died after Al-Qaeda terrorists slammed 2 planes into the Twin Towers. That figure includes firefighters and paramedics, New York City police officers, Port Authority police officers, and the passengers on the 2 planes. At 8:46 a.m. on September 11, 2001, a Boeing 767 jet was flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 18 minutes later, a second plane, also a Boeing 767, crashed into the South Tower. Within the 2 hours following, both towers had collapsed. September 11 began at 5:45 a.m. for the 2 hijackers, Mohammed Atta and Abdul Aziz Al-Amari, after they passed through security at the Portland International Jetport in Maine. They boarded a commuter flight to Boston Logan International Airport before boarding American Airlines Flight 11. At 7:59 a.m., Flight 11 took off from Boston, heading for Los Angeles, California. There were 76 passengers, 11 crew members, and 5 hijackers on board. The group, all Saudi Arabian nationals, were Mohammed Atta, the ringleader and trained pilot, seated in business class; Abdul Aziz Al-Amari, who was in business class with Atta; Satam al-Sakami, who also sat in business class; Wael al-Shari, who sat in first class; and Walid al-Shari, who also sat in first class. At 8:19 a.m., ground personnel received a call from flight attendant Betty Ann Ong, who advised them that a stabbing had occurred in business class and a hijacking was underway. All staff had been locked out of the cockpit.
In the back, the cockpit's not answering. Somebody's stabbed in business class, and I think there's mates that we can't breathe. I don't know. I think we're getting hijacked. Which flight are you on? Flight 12.
And what seat are you at? Ma'am, are you there?
Yes.
What seat are you in?
Ma'am, what seat are you in? We just left Boston. We're up in the air. We're supposed to go to L.A., and the cockpit's not answering their phone.
Okay, but what seat are you sitting in? What's the number of your seat?
Okay, I'm in my jump seat right now.
Okay.
At 3R.
Okay, you're the flight attendant? I'm sorry, did you say you're the flight attendant?
Hello?
Yes, hello? What is your
Hi.
name?
You're going to have to speak up. I can't hear you.
Sure. What is your name?
Okay, my name is Betty Ong. I'm number 3 on Flight 11.
Okay.
And the cockpit is not answering their phone. And there's somebody stabbed in business class, and we can't breathe in business class. Somebody's got mace or something.
Can you describe the person that you said someone is what in business class?
I'm sitting in the back. Somebody's coming back from business. If you can hold on for 1 second, they're coming back. They want to know who thinks stabbed who, you know? I don't know, but Karen and they got stabbed. Okay. Our number 1 got stabbed. Our person is stabbed. Nobody knows who stabbed who, and we can't even get up to business class right now because nobody can breathe. Our number 1 is stabbed right now.
Okay.
At 8:24 a.m., Mohammed Atta, while in the cockpit, unintentionally alerted air controllers in Boston to the attack. He meant to press the button that allowed him to talk to the passengers on his flight. After hearing the broadcast from Atta on Flight 11, Boston Air Traffic Control alerted the U.S. Air Force's Northeast Defense Sector, who then mobilized the Air National Guard to follow the plane. The second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, departed from Boston at 8:15 a.m., also headed for Los Angeles. There were 51 passengers, 9 crew members, and 5 hijackers on board. The 5 hijackers were led by trained pilot Marwan al-Shari from the United Arab Emirates. The team included Fayez Banahmad, also from the United Arab Emirates, as well as Hamza al-Ghamdi, Hamed al-Ghamdi, and Mohand al-Shari, all from Saudi Arabia. At 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 crashed into the World Trade Center's North Tower. All passengers aboard were instantly killed, and employees inside the World Trade Center from the 91st floor upward were trapped. At 9:03 a.m., Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower. All passengers aboard were killed instantly, along with an unknown number of people in the tower. At 9:05 a.m., President George W. Bush was visiting an elementary school classroom in Florida when he was informed about the hit on the second tower. His chief of staff, Andrew Card, whispered the news into the president's ear. Bush later wrote about his response, "I made the decision not to jump up immediately and leave the classroom. I didn't want to rattle the kids. I wanted to project a sense of calm. I had been in enough crises to know that the first thing the leader has to do is project calm." At 9:45 a.m., the U.S. airspace was shut down under Operation Yellow Ribbon, with all civilian aircraft ordered to land at the nearest airports. The World Trade Center towers had been designed and built in the mid-1960s through to the early 1970s. They represented a new approach to skyscrapers in that they were to be very lightweight and involved modular construction methods. The building was an egg crate construction that was technically 95% air, which explains why the rubble after the collapse was minimal. During the initial impact, an explosion occurred when the jet fuel, comprising nearly 1/3 of the aircraft's weight, ignited with the ensuing fire. While it was impossible for the fuel-rich, diffuse flame fire to burn at a temperature high enough to melt the steel, its quick ignition and intense heat caused the steel to lose at least half its strength. This weakening and buckling of the steel caused a few floors to fall, while the weight of the stories above crushed the floors below, initiating a domino collapse. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. Due to uncontrolled fires that burned for 7 hours, Building 7 of the World Trade Center collapsed at 5:30 p.m. There is speculation that the fall of the World Trade Center was an inside job, and that the US government intended to bring down the buildings using explosives in a false flag attack. But let's take a look at a precursor attack on the World Trade Center, which occurred on Friday, February the 26th, 1993. At 17 minutes past noon, a thunderous explosion rocked Lower Manhattan. A rented van had exploded in the underground car park, instantly killing 6 people and injuring over 1,000. The explosion carved out a massive crater several stories deep, sending smoke and flames streaming upward into the building. Those who weren't trapped began pouring out of the building, many injured, panic-stricken, and covered in soot. Among the debris, the police and the New York Joint Terrorism Task Force were able to recover a VIN number of a van reported stolen the day before the attack. The van had been rented by Islamic fundamentalist Mohammed Salameh. On March 4, an FBI SWAT team was deployed to arrest Salameh when he went to retrieve his $400 deposit from the rental business. Further clues led to the arrests of Nadal Ayad, Mahmoud Abu Halima, and Ahmed Ajaj. Police had uncovered details of an apartment where the urea nitrate fuel oil device had been built, along with a storage locker which contained enough cyanide gas to wipe out a town. The man believed to be the mastermind of the attack, Ramzi Youssef, had fled to Pakistan just hours after the explosion, but wasn't captured until 1995. The FBI learned later that Yosef intended to have the bomb topple one tower, with the collapsing debris knocking down the second tower. He had also been plotting simultaneous attacks of a dozen US international flights. During this investigation, the task force soon uncovered a plot to attack additional New York landmarks simultaneously, including the UN building, the Holland and Lincoln tunnels, and the Federal Plaza where an FBI field house was located. On June 24, 1994, FBI agents stormed a warehouse in Queens and caught several members of a terrorist cell in the act of assembling bombs. Salameh, Abu Halima and Ajaj were tried, convicted and sentenced to life at a maximum security prison in Colorado, while Nidal Ayad is serving his life sentence in Indiana. The US government considers the 1993 bombing an open case because an additional alleged conspirator, Abdul Rahman Yassin, who fled the United States in March 1993, remains at large to this day. Today, the names of the victims of the 1993 World Trade Center attack are on a panel near the North Pool where the North Tower once stood. The memorial, which had been originally placed there, had been destroyed in the September 11 attacks. Headed for Los Angeles, American Airlines Flight 77 departed from Dulles International Airport in the Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C. at 8:20 a.m. The team of 5 hijackers, led by Hani Hanjour, were seated in business class. One of the hijackers was Khalid al-Mihdhar and had been known to U.S. intelligence officials as a member of Al-Qaeda. This detail had not been communicated to the FAA, so al-Mihdhar was never added to a no-fly list. The other hijackers were Majed Maked, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and Salim al-Hazmi, all Saudi Arabian nationals. The American Airlines Boeing 757 took off 10 minutes behind schedule at 8:20 a.m. on September 11 with a crew of 6 and only 53 passengers. 3 of the passengers were children, accompanied by 3 teachers and some officials on a National Geographic Society field trip. Barbara Olson, wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson, as well as vacationers and work commuters were on the flight. Hanjour was a trained pilot. About half an hour after takeoff, the hijackers took control of the aircraft. At 8:54 a.m., the Indianapolis Center air traffic controllers noticed the westbound plane had made an unauthorized turn to the south, deviating from its flight plan. 2 minutes later, the airplane's transponder was turned off. Radio contact was also lost. An air traffic controller at the Indianapolis Air Traffic Control Center tried repeatedly to make contact with the pilot. Receiving no response, he tried to contact American Airlines to no avail. Unaware of the earlier hijackings, the air traffic controllers began notifying other agencies that the plane might have crashed due to electrical or mechanical failure. At 9:09 a.m., the Indianapolis Air Traffic Control Center notified the Federal Aviation Administration Regional Center that it had lost contact with Flight 77. At 9:12 a.m., one of the flight attendants, Renee May, used her mobile phone to call her mother, asking her to inform American Airlines that the plane had been hijacked. A couple of minutes later, Barbara Olson phoned her husband to tell him that the plane had been hijacked and that all the people aboard had been herded to the rear of the plane. About that time, the Indianapolis Air Traffic Control Center learned from American Airlines that the other planes had been hijacked. A discussion ensued between the FAA Command Center and Indianapolis, and another confused conversation took place between the FAA and the Northeast Air Defense Sector. In the meantime, Flight 77 traveled undetected back in the direction of Washington for 36 minutes. At 9:32 a.m., air traffic controllers at Dulles discovered an unidentified aircraft traveling east at a high rate of speed and notified staff at Reagan National Airport. FAA officials at both airports notified the Secret Service, and controllers at Reagan ordered an airborne National Guard cargo plane to find and follow the unidentified aircraft. At 9:34 a.m., Flight 77 was 5 miles west-south southwest of the Pentagon. It executed a sharp turn and quick descent in the direction of the Pentagon. As millions were watching the event unfolding in New York, American Airlines Flight 77 circled over downtown Washington, D.C., before crashing into the west side of the Pentagon military headquarters. The plane hit the outer wall between the first and second floors and smashed through 3 of the Pentagon's 5 concentric rings. Jet fuel exploded into a fireball, and about half an hour later, a section of the building above where the plane hit collapsed. Most of the people working in the complex had been evacuated prior to the impact. However, 125 people still working in the building were killed, as were 59 crew and passengers and the 5 hijackers on the plane. The Pentagon had recently been upgraded in response to the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, likely preventing more extensive damage and a higher death toll. The impact, fire and collapse of the affected parts of the building destroyed most of the aircraft, leaving only a few pieces of wreckage. United Airlines Flight 93 heading from Newark Airport to San Francisco was the last of the 4 flights to be hijacked on September 11. The hijackers were intending to take control of the aircraft and direct it toward Camp David, the presidential retreat in the mountains of Maryland. But due to the delay, passengers and staff had learned about other attacks, prompting some of them to plot a counter-offensive against the hijackers. At 8:42 a.m., United Flight 93 took off from Newark, New Jersey after a 40-minute delay due to routine traffic. It was headed for San Francisco, California. On board there were 33 passengers, 7 crew members and 4 hijackers. They were Ziad Jarrah, a trained pilot, Ahmed Al-Haznawi, Ahmed Al-Nami and Saeed Al-Ghamdi. At 9:28, United 93 acknowledged a transmission from an FAA center controller. This was the last normal contact the FAA had with United 93. A minute later, Cleveland Center controller John Worth and pilots of other aircraft in the vicinity heard a radio transmission of unintelligible sounds, possibly screaming or sounds of struggle from an unknown origin. Seconds later, the controller was heard responding, "Somebody call Cleveland?" This was followed by a second radio transmission with sounds of screaming and someone yelling, "Get out of here! Get out of here!" again from an unknown source. The controller began to poll the other flights on his frequency to determine whether they had heard the screaming, with several confirming that they had. Trying to identify the possible source of the transmissions, the Cleveland Center noticed that United 93 had suddenly descended around 700 feet. The controller attempted to raise United 93 several times with no response. At 9:32 a.m., a third radio transmission came over the frequency. "Keep remaining sitting. We have a bomb on board." John Worth understood, but chose to respond. "Calling Cleveland Center. You're unreadable. Say again, slowly." The controller notified his supervisor, who passed the notice up the chain of command. At 9:34, Cleveland Center reported to the FAA Command Center at Herndon, Virginia, that Flight 93 potentially had a bomb on board. By this time, 2 of the 4 hijacked planes had crashed. FAA headquarters established an open line of communication with the FAA Command Center at Herndon and instructed it to poll all the centers about suspect aircraft. During this time, the plane reversed course over Ohio and headed toward Washington, D.C. Worth had also observed United 93 climbing to 40,700 feet and immediately directed several aircraft out of its way. Meanwhile, the controller continued to make contact with United 93, asking whether the pilot could confirm that he had been hijacked. There was no response. At 9:39 a.m., a 5th radio transmission came over the frequency from United 93. Hijacker Ziad Jarrah advised that he was the captain and requested that all the passengers remain seated. He revealed that there was a bomb on board and that the craft would be travelling back to the airport. Worth responded, "United 93, understand you have a bomb on board. Go ahead." He did not receive a response to this confirmation. This was to be the last exchange Worth would have with the flight before losing contact. By 9:41, Cleveland Center had lost United 93's transponder signal. Worth located the aircraft on primary radar, matching its position with visual sightings from other pilots, and continued tracking the flight as it turned east, then south. At 9:42, Command Center learned from television news reports that a plane had struck the Pentagon. The Command Center's National Operations Manager, Ben Sliney, made an unprecedented order that all FAA facilities instruct airborne aircraft to land at the nearest airports. The air traffic control system handled the task with great skill, as approximately 4,500 commercial and general aviation aircraft soon landed without incident. At 9:53, Command Center informed headquarters they had lost track of United 93 over the Pittsburgh area. Within seconds, Command Center received a visual report from another aircraft and informed headquarters that the aircraft was 20 miles northwest of Johnstown. It was later revealed that at 9:57 a.m., passengers began running up toward the cockpit. Jarrah, the pilot, rolled the plane back and forth in an attempt to destabilize the revolt. At 10:02 a.m., Flight 93 plowed into an empty field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Although its ultimate target was unknown, it was likely heading for either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. An unarmed Air National Guard cargo plane that also had seen American Airlines 77 crash into the Pentagon 20 minutes earlier had seen black smoke. After being diverted to track Flight 77, the cargo plane had resumed its flight to Minnesota and saw the smoke from the crash of United 93 less than 2 minutes after the plane went down. At 10:17, Command Center advised headquarters of its conclusion that United 93 had indeed crashed. Despite discussions about military assistance, no one from the FAA headquarters requested military assistance regarding United 93, nor did any manager at FAA headquarters pass any of the information it had about United 93 to the military. Thanks to the heroic efforts of passengers Sandy Bradshaw, Lorraine Bay, Deborah Welsh, Jason Dahl, Thomas Burnett Jr., Mark Rothenberg, Mark Bingham, Jeremy Glick, C.C. Ross Lyles and Wanda Green, the plane crashed 85 miles away from its intended destination. There were no survivors. The bravery of the passengers and the crew of 93, which prevented the flight from reaching its intended target, was honoured by renaming Newark Airport Newark Liberty Airport. Interestingly, in August 2001, just a month prior to the September 11 attacks, multiple award-winning actor James Woods happened to be travelling on a flight from Boston to Los Angeles when he observed suspicious behaviour from 4 Middle Eastern men. Woods was alone in first class with the 4 men. He observed the unusual behaviour of these individuals, noting that during the entire cross-country flight, none of them had anything to eat or drink, nor did they read, sleep, or appear to make themselves comfortable. Instead, they sat erect in their seats and stared straight ahead, completely ignoring flight attendants and speaking to each other in barely audible tones. Woods immediately flagged down a flight attendant requesting to speak with the captain, voicing his concern that the men were intending to hijack the plane, while fully aware of the implications of using the word hijack while in flight. Although his concerns were largely ignored by the captain, the flight attendant made a report to the FAA. In the minutes following the 9/11 attacks, Woods immediately advised the FBI of what he'd observed on that flight. The FBI were in contact within 2 minutes of him making the call. In those months leading up to the 9/11 attacks, Woods was fully aware of the threat brewing with an enemy who wanted the complete and utter destruction of the West. It is believed that this flight proved to have been a dry run for the 9/11 hijackers. On the morning of September 11, 2001, a fifth plane, United Airlines Flight 23, departing at 9 a.m., was ordered back to the gate when the terrorist attacks began. 4 young Arab passengers jumped off the plane, abandoning their bags. A search later revealed box cutters and Al-Qaeda documents. The existence of the fifth plane was never reported by the US government and not mentioned by the 9/11 Commission in their official report. However, on May 15th of 2011, Wilmington News Journal featured a front-page article on the Delaware Air National Guard's first female general, Carol Timmons. General Timmons had a long career as a pilot and worked as a commercial pilot for Pan Am and United Airlines. The profile of General Timmins recounted that on the morning of September 11, she was the co-pilot on United Airlines Flight 23, preparing to take off from New York's JFK Airport bound for Los Angeles. The plane had already pulled away from the gate and was taxiing down the runway when it was abruptly called back and the crew ordered to secure the cockpit. Timmins confirmed that as pilot, Tom Manello grabbed the crash axe. She jumped from her seat and barricaded the cockpit door. From the other side of the barricade, the cabin crew relayed their concerns about 4 Arab men in first class who had become agitated after learning takeoff was cancelled. The flight attendant's suspicions about the Arab men had been confirmed. One of the men had been wearing a burqa. The flight attendants had noticed his hands were large and had hair on them. Another, wearing a yellow t-shirt, had been sweating profusely at 8 a.m., an hour before takeoff, despite the plane being air-conditioned. Another man, wearing a tan suit, asked the flight attendants if he could take his son to see the cockpit. The flight was an extra long flight and the staff were trying to organise food for the first-class passengers. However, the passengers were growing impatient and expressed that they didn't want to eat nor discuss the topic of food, but that the plane had to take off immediately. After receiving a message from the dispatch controllers that there had been a cockpit intrusion and that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center, Captain Manello then received a call from Kennedy Ground Control advising flight personnel that the airport was officially closed. They had been ordered to evacuate the facility and that flight staff were essentially on their own. As the passengers disembarked, one of them curiously asked the flight attendants, "Did they get the White House?" Later, it was discovered one of the floor hatches that led into the plane's electronics bay had been left open. This floor hatch was close to the first-class section, but mystery still surrounds as to the circumstances behind the open door. Timmins, Manello, and the rest of the crew were repeatedly questioned by the FBI, though the findings were never shared. Timmins concluded that Flight 23 would have been the next plane hijacked by terrorists. In response to the official silence about the incident for almost a decade, General Timmins stated, "The FBI asks questions. They don't tell you things." Al-Qaeda, which translates to the base, was a Sunni Islamist fundamentalist group led by Saudi Arabian-born Osama bin Laden, with headquarters established in countries such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Sudan. The primary goal of Al-Qaeda was the establishment of a transnational Islamic caliphate governed by Sharia law, with the objective of removing Western influence from Muslim-majority countries through violence and global jihad. Osama bin Laden was born in 1957, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. As the founder of Al-Qaeda, he masterminded numerous terrorist attacks against the United States and other Western powers, including the suicide bombing of the US warship Cole in the Yemeni port of Aden in the year 2000, and the September 11 attacks. Bin Laden was one of more than 50 children of Mohammed bin Laden, a self-made billionaire. At the time of his death in an airplane accident in 1967, Mohammed's company was one of the largest construction firms in the Middle East, and the bin Laden family had developed a close relationship with the Saudi royal family. Osama bin Laden studied business administration at King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah, where he received instruction in religious studies which became key to his future role as leader of Al-Qaeda, not only in influencing his radical views, but also in providing him with the skill to market the terrorist group. After spending time in Afghanistan during the Afghan-Soviet War, bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia in 1989, but it wasn't long before he was regarded by the government as a radical. Moreover, bin Laden was outraged when he learned that Saudi Arabia relied on US troops for protection during the Persian Gulf War, which led to a rift between himself and the country's leaders. In 1991, he left Saudi Arabia, settling in Sudan, where his Al-Qaeda network began to formulate an agenda of violent struggle against the perceived threat of US dominance in the Muslim world. Meanwhile, bin Laden publicly praised other groups' attacks on Americans, including the previously mentioned 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. In 1994, as bin Laden expanded his group's infrastructure in Sudan and trained Islamic militants to participate in conflicts around the world, the Saudi Arabian government revoked his citizenship and froze his assets, forcing him to rely on outside sources for funding. In 1996, under heavy international pressure, Sudan expelled bin Laden, and he returned to Afghanistan, where he received protection from its ruling Taliban militia. Later that year, bin Laden issued the first of two fatwas, declaring a holy war against the United States, accusing them of looting the natural resources of the Muslim world and occupying the Arabian Peninsula, including the holy sites of Islam. Bin Laden's apparent goal was to draw the United States into a large-scale war that would disrupt the existing world order and establish a single Islamic state. In December 2001, bin Laden went into hiding after evading capture by US forces in the Tora Bora cave complex. In the following years, US forces searched for him along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, where he would eventually emerge in a videotaped message claiming responsibility for the September 11 attacks. He periodically released audio messages, with one audio recording threatening retaliation for the deaths of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. US forces continued to hunt for bin Laden before US intelligence located him in the tribal regions of Pakistan, living in a secure compound in Abbottabad near Islamabad. On May 2, 2011, bin Laden was killed when a small US force transported by helicopters raided the compound. His body, identified visually at the site of the raid, was taken out of Pakistan by US forces for examination and DNA identification. Soon after, he was given a sea burial. Hours after its confirmation, bin Laden's death was announced by Barack Obama in a televised address. Shortly after Obama's announcement, Al-Qaeda released a statement publicly acknowledging bin Laden's death and vowing revenge. Zacarias Moussaoui was believed to be 9/11's 20th hijacker. In August of 2001, Moroccan Moussaoui enrolled in flight training lessons at a school in Minneapolis, Minnesota. On August 15, 2001, the flight school reported its suspicions about Moussaoui to the FBI, stating that he only wanted to learn how to take off and land an airplane, that he had no background in aviation, and that he had paid in cash for the course. After interviewing Moussaoui's flight instructor, his roommate, and then Moussaoui himself, the FBI detained Moussaoui for a violation of his immigration status and seized his belongings, including a computer and personal papers. On the morning of September 11, Moussaoui's deportation was being finalised before the first hijacked plane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. After the first airplane hit, a criminal search warrant was obtained for Moussaoui's belongings, with the FBI concluding that in light of what had happened in New York, it would have been the hugest coincidence if Moussaoui was not involved with the terrorists. A laptop computer and associated computer software such as diskettes, spiral-bound notebooks, clothes, and a cellular telephone had been seized from Moussaoui, which contained evidence of a violation of the United States federal criminal statute covering the destruction of aircraft or aircraft facilities. Other items found included a pair of shin guards, a Northwest Airlines 747 cockpit operating manual, 2 747 training videos, 7 spiral notebooks containing handwritten notes about aviation, a Microsoft Flight Simulator book, a PowerPoint compact disc, binoculars, headphones, a skull cap, a cassette recorder, European coins, eyeglasses, disposable razors, and several documents including financial records, blank checks, and identification papers from France. Moussaoui's defense team stated that his belongings did not reveal anything that specifically provided a warning or an indication of an imminent terrorist attack. There were no plans, correspondence, nor names or addresses in his computer or notebooks that linked him directly to the September 11 terrorist attacks. Some viewers may recognise this man standing beside Moussawi's mother. London-based human rights law firm known as Christian Khan worked as consultants for the defence team of Moussawi. Moussawi wanted a Muslim lawyer. Sadiq Khan was a solicitor and a partner at this law firm, which was asked to provide legal consultation on the fairness of Moussawi's detention and a right to a fair trial in the United States. Virtually all traces of this image have disappeared from the internet. Khan has since stated he never met Moussawi in person and was not qualified nor licensed to represent a client in the US courts. A judge denied a request for his direct involvement in the US legal proceedings. Khan had left the firm before Moussawi's trial and sentencing in 2006. The issue was a point of political contention during the 2016 London mayoral elections. Today, numerous memorials exist in various towns and cities across the United States, with the major 9/11 memorials located at the National September 11 Memorial and Museum in New York City, the Pentagon Memorial in Arlington, Virginia, and the Flight 93 National Tower Voices Memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The National September 11 Memorial and Museum, situated at the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, is a 16-acre complex featuring two massive reflecting pools built within the original footprints of the Twin Towers, surrounded by names of the victims. The site also includes a memorial museum, a survivor tree, and the 9/11 Memorial Glade. In Staten Island, New York, the Postcards Memorial is dedicated to the residents of Staten Island who lost their lives in the 9/11 and the 1993 World Trade Center attacks. The tribute in light in New York City is displayed each year on the anniversary of September 11 at the World Trade Center site. The Pentagon Memorial in Arlington County, Virginia, located just outside the Pentagon, honors the 184 lives lost there, with 184 dedicated benches arranged in a timeline of the victims' ages. The Flight 93 National Memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, is located at the crash site, featuring the Tower of Voices, which contains 40 wind chimes and honors the 40 passengers and crew. In Indiana, the 9/11 Memorial, located near Fire Station 13, features beams from the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and a survivor tree.